In this video, we'll talk about the cerebellum. Now, cerebellum is located at the posterior aspect and the inferior aspect of the brain. Now, it is connected to the cerebral cortex, the basal nuclei, the brainstem, and the spinal cord. So a lot of information flows into the cerebellum for processing and flows out. Now, what's one of the big things it does? It helps to all this interaction helps to coordinate motion. I think that, or movement. I think that's a good place to start. Now, anatomically, the cerebellum, and we'll have a look at a diagram shortly, it has two cerebellar hemispheres connected by a region we call the vermis. Now, there are ridges on the cerebellum, unlike, well, maybe I shouldn't say unlike, but akin to the gyri and sulci, but they're much smaller, and we'll have a look at them. But the ridges we're going to call folia, and they cover the external surface of the cerebellum. And there's little shallow sulci. And of course, this helps to increase surface area in the region. So let's have a look. And so what they're trying to show you here is the whole cerebellum would be in this area. This is a posterior view. And they've lightened it here. And the reason they've lightened it so you can sort of see inside and see these things called cerebellar peduncles. We'll talk about those in a second. Now, you can see that you have these folia, these folds with sulci in between. And we have an anterior lobe and posterior lobes of the cerebellum. And here's one side of the cerebellum, here's another side, and there's a connection here, which is the vermis. That's the vermis right there. Now, up here you can see the brainstem and the diencephalon, so you should start to recognize some of these structures of the diencephalon that are right up here. Now, they've made it see-through here because they want to show you, and I want to show you this too, is what they're trying to show you is that there's connections between the brainstem and the cerebellum, because, as I said, the cerebellum is about processing a lot of information. So a lot of information has to go from many parts of the central nervous system into the cerebellum, be processed, and be output back to the rest of the central nervous system. And these cerebellar peduncles are the highways of fibers that carry information into the cerebellum and out of the cerebellum. We also have nuclei that are located within there, so there's some deep cerebellar nuclei. Now, the cerebellum is divided into three lobes: the anterior, the posterior, and the nodular. It's a big one to say. Now, the cerebellar cortex, the outer layer, is gray matter. And as we've already seen in the diagram, it's highly folded. And we have a lot of branching white matter, which is called the arbor vitae. And it's called the arbor vitae because it actually looks like tree branches. Okay, here's just another look of the cerebellum, and you can see the vermis. You can see they're trying to show you the cerebellar peduncles here. Now, when I start to look inside the cerebellum, the inner white matter contains a group of nuclei, the deep cerebellar nuclei that are scattered throughout it. And the white matter that we find within there basically forms three large tracts, which we call the cerebellar peduncles. And these are the connections between the cerebellum and the brainstem. So all information going into the cerebellum and coming out of the cerebellum has to pass through these peduncles, these large tracts that connect. Now, here's sort of a side view, and let's have a look. So you can see we have a bit of a cut section here, and you can see that the general makeup is that on the surface there's a lot of gray matter, but here's all these white matter tracks. Okay, all this white matter that's going to carry information in and carry information out. Now remember, this was given a special name. This is called the arbor vitae, which is a beautiful name because it means the tree of life. And I think it's very appropriate. So all this white matter, and I'll just take the highlighter away, have a look at it. It does kind of look like trees. So the arbor vitae are the white matter tracks. Now, here we can start to see some of the peduncles. We have a superior, middle, and inferior group of peduncles. And here is we're looking at the brain stem, and here's the pons, and here's the medulla. So you can see here the middle cerebellar peduncle is associated with the pons and is carrying information between the two at this point. Okay. Now, let's go over here and we can actually look at it within a cadaver dissection. And here, just to give us an orientation, here's basically where the spinal cord would start from down there. Down there on would be spinal cord. Here we're into the brain stem. And here we see the medulla oblongata. Here's the pons. The pons, you can tell, the pons bulges out like that. And then, of course, we get up here and we can see, just like we did up here, once we go from here, we're heading up into the midbrain region. Now, over here, we can see that the arbor vitae, etc. Now, you can't see as clearly here the peduncles because of the sectioning. We've sectioned right down through mid-sagittal, right through the middle. So one of the peduncles would actually be buried deep down there because they're bilateral, and one would be just outside towards you. If it was sticking out of the screen, it would be a few centimeters moved over this way, or I shouldn't say centimeters, it'd be probably a half centimeter or so. What you can see here is actually part of the ventricular system, right in there. And this is a midline view once again. So we're going to end it there on the cerebellum. Now, get into your book, read the book, really look at it and try and think about what's the anatomy, what are the connections between the cerebellum and the brain stem and the rest of the central nervous system, and really think about what type of functions are happening within it.